Welcome to Unmasking Social, where we talk about building real friendships and meaningful connections without masking who we truly are. I'm your host, Sharon, a speech and language pathologist with an expertise in social thinking and how it relates to autism and ADHD, specifically with our teens and tweens. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. On today's episode, we have someone, Rebecca Tarrant, who is a lawyer who decided that she was going to make strides. And now she's a global advocate for individuals with autism, walks the walk, talks the talk. She is a mother to a child with autism with high support needs, but also someone who is autistic herself. So her advocacy is blended with lived experiences, personal experiences. Enjoy the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Unmasking Social. Today, we have a wonderful neurodiversity advocate and autism advocate, Rebeeca Tarrant, whose activism has shaped the global conversation about what it means to be autistic. Her newly branded Autistic Youth International, formerly known as Autism Kids, holds a deep commitment to representation, and as an autistic mother to an autistic child, Tarrant uses lived experience to shape their policies. AYI's latest initiative is Neurodivergent Youth Advocacy Day, which will take place in colleges and universities around the globe in April 2026. So, Rebecca, it is so great to have you on here. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's so great to be here.
I really want to just get right into it. I feel like this episode is going to be an episode of celebration because it really is you speaking to all the wonderful things that can come out of celebrating neurodivergence and overall autism while also supporting your children, but also supporting individuals on a more global level. But it's interesting because your background is not that of one which started like that. You have a JD and you were practicing a lawyer for a bit. And now you are this huge powerhouse of advocacy for individuals around the world. How did we get from point A to point B?
Well, my son was diagnosed as a minimally speaking autistic at 18 months old. At the time, I was working in law firm marketing. But after the diagnosis, I began to feel that I really wanted to do something. I wanted to take action. So I began volunteering with local organizations. I volunteered with a couple different organizations. They didn't really feel right. They didn't have the focus on neurodivergent pride that I did, that I wanted to see. So I founded Autism Kids, which is now Autistic Youth International, in two responses. One to the lack of inclusive books in the Charlotte public schools, and another one was a way to bring Neurodiversity Pride Day to Charlotte. So my child brought home books every night for us to read together, and I noticed that there weren't any characters that had visible or invisible disabilities. They were all it was just all ableism and all white characters, male, there was no diversity. So I went to the school board to ask them if they would give me funds to purchase diverse books, and they said that they didn't have the funds. So I decided to do it myself, and to date, we are donating our 1,000th inclusive book to Title I schools this month. And then I discovered Neurodiversity Pride Day online one night, and it is a celebration that was started in the Netherlands by an organization called the Neurodiversity Foundation. I love the idea, and I decided to try it here in Charlotte, so we tried it just to see what would happen. And it was really well received. And this past June was our 3rd year celebrating. Our festival had adaptive sports, inclusive art and music, nature center, vendors. We had free ice cream, just everything you would ever want at a festival. But the festival was all inclusive and sensory friendly.
So you've done a lot. You went from working in this law firm and then you had an individual, actually a child, more than an individual, your baby. How old now?
He is going to be 9 next month, but he was 18 months at the time when he was diagnosed.
Right. So you go from this situation where you're a lawyer and then you end up now doing something large with something that happened in your life, which is you have this child who's now 9 years old, but at 18 months, you find out that there's a diagnosis of autism, and then you start changing things in North Carolina and shaking things up. as you have, you showed us and told us, even with this book donation. So it's interesting because there were no books, you said, with individuals that were represented at the time. And now that he's 9 years old, that was about I can't do math, but about 8.5 years ago, right? Where it's basically kind of, there was just nothing. And now you've reached, if we're starting with the book piece, you now have reached the 1,000, I believe 1,000 book donation. So how have you been able to advocate in a way that brings people in North Carolina for this specific project, or even outside of North Carolina, to know about this, to want to engage with this, to be neurodivergent and sensory friendly? How do you make that happen?
Well, I think a lot of people really, the book drive really resonated with them because there are so many book lovers and so many people remember that their favorite book from when they were a kid. And when I make the argument that when I was a kid, I loved, Nancy Drew, for instance. That was one of the only books that had a female lead, and not just a female as a character, as a cook, as a wife, as a whatever, but as the main character. And I think when you start explaining to people the representation, that these children will now see that they can be the heroes of the story and not just a background character. I think that really resonates with people and they want to see that.
It's interesting with representation because I feel like that's something that we've come a long way with. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, there was really no representation of anybody that looked a little different than what the stereotypical character was in books. So, and so I think we have evolved, but it's so wonderful that you're contributing in this kind of way to bring voices together so that individuals who are neurodivergent, if you're listening to the, because we have an audience of neurodivergent individuals that listen, as well as families and professionals, know that there are many books out there. That celebrate this to this day. And Rebecca can actually share that with us later on. I'll, drop a link, obviously, at the end of this episode so people can find that with resources to books. And then you also are just, it sounds like you're also shaping the policies because there are all these advocacy days that have been brought into um, the language or the vernacular of the people in North Carolina as well as globally, because you are now leading the, it used to be Autism Kids, but in collaboration with the Netherlands, you're now leading the Autistic Youth International, and now it goes up to college, even as you mentioned prior to this
Mhm.
recording. And so even something like that, shaping policy. So basically now people internationally can join this movement if they feel like they need to join the movement or want to join the movement because something in them is calling that they need something bigger.
So, Neurodiversity Pride Day was started 9 years ago in the Netherlands by the Neurodiversity Foundation. And one night, like I said, I was just kind of messing around on the computer and I was looking up neurodiversity generally, and I came across this celebration. And I thought, that's amazing. Why don't we do that in America? Why don't we celebrate what makes our brains unique? So I just decided to do it. After I had done it, I reached out to the Neurodiversity Foundation and said, hey, I'm in America. I'm doing your thing. I'm Rebecca. And they were extremely gracious, and I started working with them. And now I am their global ambassador and also the director of the US for Neurodiversity Pride Day. So I'm helping people everywhere come up with their own type of events and celebrations. I started an initiative with flags globally where, along with the Neurodiversity Foundation, we shipped out 180 Neurodiversity Pride Day flags. So the idea is that we sent them to advocates all around the world, and the advocates would take a picture of themselves waving the flag and then send us the photo, and we're making a film out of it. So that's what we're doing right now. That's our latest thing. But yes, there are celebrations in over 50 countries now.
Wow. When do you sleep, Rebecca? Is there any time for that, or it's just constant doing? It seems like you're so busy.
I'm not a good sleeper because my son isn't a good sleeper. So, and I'm also bipolar. So I do have some manic episodes where I stay up for a couple days, and they come in handy.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does sound like you are, I mean, you have your hands full, right? I mean, but it's so fascinating how you have been able to change this, what might have been challenging in the earlier years, and maybe continues to be some sort of challenge in terms of navigating life with your child, but also loving your child deeply. I mean, the way you speak of your child, just on your things that I've read, and just the way you lit up before when you mentioned your 9-year-old, and what is your
Jackson.
Jackson, yeah, and the way you lit up about Jackson just is a testament to how you really have learned a lot from your child in order to celebrate not only your child, but to celebrate what your child represents. in a larger movement. And you so as you've raised Jackson, you've now celebrated it, and you mentioned this Pride Day, right? Because Jackson should have pride in what is really Jackson, in
Mhm.
terms of everything, whether it's the autism and, the other challenges or great things that aren't challenging that are going to be along with Jackson's ride through life. So, what does this Pride Day really mean? And on a larger scale, like Rebecca, I know this is a deeper question, but what does autistic pride really mean to you? And how do you want it to shape Jackson?
Autism Pride. What was the first part of your question? That was a long
Oh,
question.
sure. That was a very long question. That was like for us speech SLPs on my end, it's like
No.
three-step directive over there. All right.
ADHD. I'm
Yeah,
ADHD.
yeah, I know. Yeah.
There's my autism
Undiagnosed
thing.
here. Yeah.
Started with the first question.
So, but yeah, so basically with this autistic pride, I mean, I
Yes.
know that you want Jackson to have pride in who he is, right? And you want that pride to go a long way. And so you have this autistic pride day, which is really an extension of the pride that Jackson should have on a more global scale, because this is all around the world. So I'm just curious about what that pride day looks like more specifically, but also what that pride really means to you and what you want for Jackson in terms of pride, which is you and him together.
When my son was diagnosed, it was awful. I didn't know anything about autism. The diagnosis was very deficit based. It was all, excuse me, it's hard to even talk about. He's never going to live independently. He's probably never going to speak. Manage your expectations. He's never going to go to college. He probably won't get married. And it was just like this long list. I think they were trying to not give me false hope, but instead, to me, it felt like he had died because the picture they were painting was a fate worse than death. It really was, that he's just going to be this person that breathes, eats, and poops, and that's it. And that's all his life is. And it broke my heart, my husband and mine both, and we grieved for him. And it did not have to be like that. Autism, when you talk about autism pride, a lot of people get confused because those of us who have children with high support needs, or those that were diagnosed as level 3, they tend to get upset when you talk about autism pride because they think, well, my child can't feed themselves. They don't, can't, don't. How are you talking about autistic pride? Autistic pride is really a culmination and a combination of both the strengths and the struggles. I'm not denying that my child can't speak. That's not up for debate. I'm denying that because he was born minimally speaking, he doesn't have any right to having self-esteem or pride in himself. His autism is such a huge part of who he is. I mean, if you think about like a big pile of spaghetti, all tangled up together. His autism is all tangled up in that. And if you start talking about taking the autism away, curing it, pulling it apart, you don't know what else is going to unravel. The autism is the spaghetti. So we really want to just both, acknowledge his struggles and the things that are really hard for him, but also let him know that he has a unique and amazing brain. There are things that he can do that other people can't do. And so it's a mixed bag. So we try to look at it really factually and really realistically, but we also look at it optimistically.
I think that is so wonderful because, again, I had actually somebody on this podcast, Dr. Robert Nassif, who is currently a psychologist and works with the neurodivergent population, but also had a child who was, as we say that in the vernacular, high level of support, right? Am I getting it right? I always
I
feel like
support
I'm
needs. Yeah.
high support needs. Sorry. That's where my word retrieval comes in. So no, high support needs. And what you're describing is kind of the experience that he went through. And he wasn't a psychologist yet. And even if you are the world's best psychologist, this is a child. This is what you envisioned something for that. That's why I know that you were saying that it was hard to talk about, because he explained, and maybe this resonates with you, how it was hard to basically have this child that he didn't envision that having a child like that. In his mind, he envisioned a child that he was going to play sports with because he loves sports. And he would play catch and do all these things. And the dream that he had to kind of put in the back of his mind led to this period of grief, like you discussed. So, I feel like that's a common struggle of when life doesn't go the way that you envisioned it for you or your family member. Is kind of can be a moment in a time of grief. And then just like you, he as a father also turned this into purpose where he works a lot with the neurodivergent community in big
Mhm.
ways. Sounds like to me having pride is knowing that, okay, I have these challenges, and at the same time, I'm really proud of my unique mind, of my unique brain.
Mhm.
And there are things that Jackson can do that other people can't because their brains don't operate like that. And so that's what I think people are missing from neurodivergence and just autism in general, or ADHD, or all the different ways that it manifests, is that there is a brain that's very unique and very clever, that can do things that others can't do.
Mhm.
And it's wonderful that you're, walking the walk, talking the talk, and doing all these things so that Jackson can see with his own eyes what you're doing. But that doesn't mean that it has been easy.
Well, I was actually diagnosed with autism myself a few months back, and I was trying to figure out how to tell Jackson that I was autistic. And I told him, you know how you're autistic? Mommy's autistic too. But he didn't understand because to him, autism means non speaking. So he couldn't understand how I could be autistic and also speak. So what we ended up doing is we baked a cake together and took icing and made like infinity symbols. And I had Neurodiversity Pride Day flags and we stuck them in there. And it was Happy Autism Day for Mommy because
Oh,
he can understand a celebration. He understands cakes and birthdays and things. And so we did it like that. And that's how we handled it in our house. And my husband is autistic. So our entire family is autistic. So autistic pride is very essential in everything we do as a family.
that's so interesting because what you did with him was you created these visual supports for him, which is something that educators always speak about. And as an SLP myself, this visual representation. And in this case, a visual representation of what pride looks like with the infinity symbols on a cake, which he probably likes to eat. So you're bringing something that he enjoys doing. And so for the neurodivergent people, especially the teens and tweens that listen, a lot of teens and tweens listen to this podcast, a lot of the meaning behind this podcast is trying to support these individuals, but help them embrace who they truly are. And I think that what you're doing is really embracing who Jackson really is, who you are, who everybody is. And it's so interesting that he didn't understand that. And that's so normal for him not to understand. Wait a second, there are different like shades of this. Like, what's going on here? For any child, not just someone who has trouble seeing the shades of gray. For any child in general, you're saying that we both have something. And wait, what? Like, how does that add up when I can barely speak? But then you showed him through those visuals. And so for anyone who's listening, these are things that you can do with your child or for yourself, especially in the teen and tween years. Like, celebrate who you really are by doing things like that. Like, maybe having a gathering with your family, like you did, like a gathering with the family, with everybody around you, with something that you like to eat, like to engage in, with things that represent you. Because in every culture, there are celebrations. There are things that everybody does in every culture. So why should it be different with neurodivergence?
Something I learned only recently is that we have started leaning into autism in our family and really just we've accepted the fact that our household and our lives are going to look different, and that's okay. So, for instance, my son, we think he has dyscalculia and he struggles with numbers and he can't tell time on any kind of clock. So, what I did is I got a cuckoo clock. So now the bird pops out in cuckoos 7 times, so he knows it's 7 o'clock. Or he has a hard time understanding calendars. So I have a year-round tree that we decorate with ornaments so he knows what month it is. And you just find ways. It's not bad to be different. It's not bad to be autistic. It's going to look a lot different, but you're going to be a lot happier and have a lot more peace inside if you lean into it and embrace it.
Yeah, so that's what you're speaking about is the acceptance piece, it sounds like, where you have reached the point of acceptance, which is so huge because I feel like people could spend their whole life trying to accept something. This comes up a lot on the episodes of the piece. If you're a mom or a dad or just someone who's experiencing this, and not happy about it. And you grieve and you have a period of grief. And then I'm not a psychologist, but I studied psychology in undergrad, so I love talking about it. But then you reach this level of acceptance of whatever's going on in your life. And that's when you truly can get some sort of level of freedom. And so it sounds like you're in the acceptance phase where you realize, okay, things aren't looking like the way you wanted them to, but now you're pivoting the way you accommodate Jackson. Because you had mentioned even that you got a cuckoo clock, right? which is so great. Like for anyone listening, right? Using strategies, supporting with different pivots and different flexibility models. So he can't tell time. That's okay, Jackson. I mean, of course you want him to, but okay, so we'll get a specialized clock for you. And you're right. I think that not just for your family, but in recent years, there has been more of this neuro affirming approach, which is you can't tell time. That doesn't mean that we're not going to give you something to help you along. We're going to try to give you more modifications, more supports. So I think that's fascinating that you even dug deep into finding a specialized clock for him, and everybody can have fun with it. I mean, who doesn't like a good old cuckoo clock, right?
Well, it gets old after a while.
Until it's not fun anymore, but it's fun
Yeah.
for a little bit, and then, yeah, it's not that
Well,
fun anymore.
part of what I wanted to do with my nonprofit is I wanted to take away the grief phase of the diagnosis. And I'll give you an example. When my son was diagnosed with ADHD about 6 months ago, it was the exact opposite of his autism diagnosis. The diagnostician, the doctor came in and said, okay, buddy, you're ADHD. That means you're going to think a little differently. You might think outside the box. You're probably creative. You're probably good solving problems, but it's going to be hard sometimes in school, and it was a strengths-based assessment. And that's the way it should be for autism. It should not be this, this is not cancer. These children aren't dying. They have their health. They have their brains. They have their families. They're a lot better off than a lot of children in a lot of different countries. They have every opportunity and every advantage, especially if they have loving parents. So we need to take the grief out of it. Your child's life is not over. It's just beginning, and it's going to look a little different, but that's okay. Lots of people's do.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you mentioned that strength-based approach, right? That's the approach that we all love to use for those of us who work with this population, who support this population, whether it's you as a parent, me as a professional, right? And you're the biggest professional because you're the one that's living with it and that's also supporting a child with it. So you're like professional times. I'm also not good with math, but
A
times a
lot.
million. What?
A lot. Just
A
say a lot.
lot, exactly, exactly. So you're really the for me, the real professionals are the people who live the experience or live with someone who has the experience. And for you, it's both. And so you really leaned into something that professionals have come around to in the last bunch of years, which is really leaning into the strength-based approach of thinking about what can you do? What can your child do, right? Of course, there's a period for many people where it's a dream of what they can't, what did they dream of that now the child can't do that they really wanted the child to do, but using the language and really thinking about what can Jackson do? Jackson can do other things that maybe weren't really celebrated in the beginning because it was a hard time, to celebrate it. But so speaking of that, so you're using the strength-based approach, which is critical for everyone who's listening and for you as a family. What are some of, if you don't mind sharing, some of Jackson's strengths that maybe would have gone unnoticed unless you really dug deep?
I don't know if it's technically photographic memory, but he can see an image on a screen, just a scene, and just once or twice and memorize it and replicate it with his toys, with drawings, but it's extremely specific. Like he really likes the Muppets. So if he does a Muppet scene, they have the two cranky guys up here in a balcony and he's got a flashlight and he has like a scarf for the curtain. And he has this amazing ability to memorize and replicate things, which most people don't have. And we try to really lean into that and to help him use that for his studies and subjects he struggles with, to replicate it like that. He also he has an amazing creative streak. He really does. And I think that there's this narrative that autistic children are wooden or unfeeling. They're not creative. They're not emotional. And none of that is true. He's extremely creative. He's extremely emotional. He will throw you sass like you won't believe. And he's now understands sarcasm, which is a delight. Says his mother sarcastically. I have no idea where he gets it from. But yeah, he has all kinds of strengths, all kinds of things that make him him. The fact that he can't speak or that he's minimally speaking is a huge disability. It's a huge block. But we believe that he's disabled by society. I used to think, oh, well, maybe he'll be president one day. And then when he got his diagnosis, I let all of those dreams die. There's no reason for those dreams to die. There has to be a first autistic president eventually. It's just a matter of getting accommodations, getting society to let you be yourself, and to having someone on your side to yell for you. And that's what I do as an advocate. I yell for people that can't yell for themselves.
I like I really love that quote. I yell for people who can't yell for themselves, right? Because so many of these people can't use the traditional voice all the time. And even if they do have a voice and they can literally speak, it's really hard to get out there and advocate when you're not feeling so great about yourself. And or you don't really know the nuances in society and how to navigate appreciating the culture that you're a part of. And so I've had advocates on here, parent advocates, and so many others just help even families navigate the system. But you really have this really strong loyalty to the community at large, and it goes way beyond Jackson. But you did touch upon some of the strengths that I think go unnoticed sometimes because you're so focused on trying to fix what is problematic for you and what makes your heart sometimes hurt. That it's so hard sometimes to focus on the strengths because, like you said, the deficit model is always about what is hard. Thanksgiving's around the corner, so you're showing a lot of gratitude to like, wow, like my son can really, do all these things. It's like almost an art of gratitude of, wow, I'm celebrating this. And I think that it's interesting because so many of the individuals I've worked with, the teens and tweens and the younger ones, have these amazing strengths that others don't have, like you're describing, this immense creativity that knows no bounds in so many of their, as they call them, their special interests, but really it's their passions. Like they're driven by their passions. Like you touched upon Jackson being really specific, right? With his photographic memory based on his interests and his passions. And he has all this exciting, probably information to share with the whole world. So he may not be using his voice yet, but maybe one day he will. Mhm. In different ways that we accommodate that. So I'm just curious though, you've taken Jackson's story and now you've reached a global level in terms of advocacy internationally. Is there anything that struck you as different in terms of how different countries or different places around the world celebrate autism?
Oh, there's a big difference. Even just in vocabulary, if you say neurodivergent worldwide, they know things like neurodivergent, neurodiversity, the vocabulary. If you say neurodivergent here, people might look at you funny. It's not necessarily a word that's out there that people are using. The other thing is that with the current administration and the false rhetoric about autism being a disease and autism being caused by Tylenol or being caused by vaccines or whatever, globally, they don't have that conversation still going on. Globally, they are in the acceptance mode. But now with the administration attacking what autism is, how it occurs, the very essence of what we are, we are stuck on defense instead of offense. We are stuck in awareness instead of acceptance. It has pushed us back, the neurodiversity movement, by decades. We're refuting science. We're saying, oh, those poor autistic kids, we've got to save them. We've got to swoop in. Their lives are miserable. It's so toxic and poisonous. And other people around the world, the other advocates that I speak to say, we can't believe this. We can't believe that you're going back to this vaccines crap, for lack of a better word. The rest of the world is shocked and horrified by the administration's rhetoric.
So the countries that you work with are very shocked by our country in terms of what's going on, in terms of people speaking in these, what you see as maybe a regression in terms of, wait, we've come so far, right? So we're at this point, let's keep moving forward. Why are we halting it? And so you feel like the other countries are celebrating it in a different way in terms of what they're putting out? Like in
For
terms
instance, in other countries, neurodiversity in business is really popular, and they actively recruit neurodivergent people for their special brains.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more community, more celebration. It's just they're very much in the acceptance phase, and we're
Yeah.
just not.
Yeah, speaking of that, like the young adults and the ones going to college, such a hard time. I mean, for everybody. I mean, just not hard, but arduous, for the parents in any phase. And in terms of no matter what child you have, the high school, college, transition periods, we don't always necessarily in the educational system set them up for this transition time. It's kind of more on everybody else, especially, I mean, as what I see where I live here in New York City, it's they try to institute transition programs, but ultimately everybody's so different, right? So it's like hard with that time period. And then you bring in autism and managing expectations, like you said, and managing flexibility, managing changes that are happening. So I'm wondering, so you had mentioned that now Autistic Youth International, formerly Autism Kids, has branched out to these college students.
Mhm.
So with these older kids, now young adults, what are you finding in terms of, as you mentioned, employment not being so automatic? Spoken on this podcast about interviews being super challenging because, again, anything that's scripted, they're going to fall off script naturally. They're not going to necessarily know what to do when, for example, they're told to stand up but they were told to sit down for the remaining of the interview. So is there any programs that help or bridge these individuals with employment and with just transitioning?
Well, I spoke to some young people recently and college students and was just saying, hey, are you excited about getting out there in the world of work and that sort of thing? And they were not. They were not optimistic. They didn't feel that they were going to be able to find a job that would accommodate them. They were afraid that if they did get a job that accommodated them, they would be treated differently. They really were afraid that they weren't going to be judged based on their merit. The one kid said, hey, I don't want to be a pity hire, which is legitimate. So a lot of these kids really they're not optimistic about their future careers. They think that they're lucky to get a job. The idea that they would have a meaningful career is completely out of grasp, not even what they're thinking. And part of the reason that I started a Neurodivergent Youth Advocacy Day, which will be happening on April 16th in colleges and universities worldwide, is we want to get to the students before they start voting, before they get into their big boy job, big girl job, and before they start having their own children, and teaching them what neurodivergent pride is. And so they can bring that into their jobs. They'll know what their rights are. They'll know that, they deserve to have a meaningful career, not just a job. Inclusion is not just a checkbox at an employer. It's a lifelong process that you constantly have to adapt to. And these kids need to know that they have amazing skills and they have things to offer. And people say, the children are our future. And I hate when they say that because of course they are. That's how time works. But,
Literally. Yeah.
if you can get to the children, if I can get to the young children with inclusive books when they're in third grade, or I can get to a future scholar in college who might be 20 before they start voting, then we can make change, but we have to make that change with the young people.
Rebecca, I love all the things you're mentioning because I just feel like this is exactly the work that I was trained to do as an SLP in my second year. Everyone knows the story who listens to this podcast, but I was trained in this social communication model that's very neuroaffirming. And for so many years since then, not to date myself, it's been about 14 and a half years as an SLP. I really used that methodology. I was so happy that I was trained like that because back in that time, 14 and a half years ago, not everybody was thinking about it in this way, right? So time has changed. And like you said, literally time just moves on. The children are our future. Literally, that's time. But like you're even speaking to what sounds like automatic to me, but building up the confidence at a young age, because again, we speak a lot about as professionals as early detection, early intervention, right? How the key to success is early intervention. That's not to say that just because you get a later diagnosis, there's no support there. There always will be support. The key is getting the child, like you said, as early as 3 years old to figure out what their strengths are. Even as a 4-year-old, building up the confidence. And if they don't have it in college, they're going to need to have it because if they don't have that confidence, I feel like then they can't really move forward in any way. And that's why you want to, the work that you're doing is really highlighting their strengths and letting them know, look, you have these skills, right? Now it's time to use them. And how are we going to use them? It's interesting because there was someone on this podcast from Autistic Colleges. And they represent just the Neurodiversity College Foundation, or if I said that wrong, I'm so sorry. And also there's another guest that the episode will be coming out who works at Landmark College, which you may be familiar with specifically for autism. And a lot of it goes back to the understanding that it's a difficult time in college, but you also want to lean into something that you really like to do. I think everybody should do what they love to do, but they mentioned specifically this population going into majoring in something that they love to do. Otherwise, you're going to lose these kids. Is there anything that you've noticed with that where there's any missteps in terms of, well, you find these kids are in college and they're not doing what they like and they just are lost or something? because it's not their passion?
Well, I think that one problem with advocacy right now is that we are focusing on grown-ups and we're telling grown-ups to give youth their rights. I am telling youth to take their rights, and that's different. You're not telling adults, make a place for neurodivergent people. You're telling neurodivergent youth to make your own place, take your own destiny. If you have a passion, like you're speaking to, what some people call special interests, I do not. Passion is fine. You're so invested in that mentally, your whole heart's in it, that you should pursue that. And if it's something like my son is obsessed with the Muppets, but through the Muppets, he learned all about stage design. And we're looking to getting him into a program for stage design. Is that going to get him straight to the Ivies and, senator and all this stuff that people want for the kids? Probably not. Does it need to? No, it doesn't. I'm not concerned about his capitalistic value. I'm not concerned with his perceived inconvenience to other people. I'm concerned with his happiness and his place in the world. And I want him to go out and all the other kids to go out and make their place.
Rebecca, you sound like such a fantastic mom and also just such a fantastic, advocate just for the individual. I just hear your heart just coming out as you speak. You're really speaking from the heart, and it's so obvious. And as being a fantastic mother and having Jackson, a 9-year-old, a beautiful blessing. Jackson, as you said, time goes, but Jackson's going to be 10 and then 11 and then 12 and then the teenage years come. And I always say if I had a penny, so I'm not going to say that again because that's so redundant. But literally, I would be a millionaire because so many of the families that I've worked with, once the child gets a little older and is already like a teen or tween, that's a hormonal up and down time for anybody, right? But then we have our individuals who, like you said, and you touched upon this earlier, saying Jackson is emotional. And I've seen that. By the way, that is the biggest myth that I can debunk because of so many people I've worked with that actually they show compassion sometimes more than neurotypicals. Like I have seen so many just hug and go over to somebody else that they see in distress and try to calm them down with words, with their self-soothing strategies. And with that compassion and with all of that, they really want companionship. They really want other people around them. They want to find their tribe. They want to be social. As someone who is a mom to Jackson and will one day, I'm sorry, but it's going to happen, right? Teens and tween years, the hard times for everybody, the hormones and all of that. What advice would you give to parents as you have not just Jackson, but this global experience of that time period who say, they really want friends, but they're having trouble making them?
I would argue what your expectation is, because when I first started volunteering, I started doing social play dates. And everyone said, oh, my kid doesn't have any friends. I want them to have friends. So I started doing these play dates and inviting everybody. We went to parks. We went to trampoline places. We had it in people's houses. And no matter what we did, how many Legos we threw out there, how small the room was, they didn't play with each other. You know why? Because that's not how they play. A lot of autistic kids do parallel play, if anything. Some of them just want to be left alone, So the expectation, there's these parents that are boo-hoo-hoo, my kid doesn't have any friends. They're assuming that your child doesn't have a rich inner social life because it doesn't manifest the way your neurotypical autistic child does. Your autistic child is probably not going to be homecoming queen. That's not the way they roll. That's not their thing.
I wouldn't have been either.
Yeah, they're not
Just
social
my sarcasm.
butterflies,
Yeah. Mhm.
and really what you want to look at is the quality of connections. And a lot of autistic children feel a lot safer with adults. Adults are less noisy. They're more predictable and they're not as triggering. So really be a friend to a child, as odd as that may sound. And I'm not saying don't just be, hi, how are you? Condescending. Be a friend to a child, to an autistic child. Find out what they're afraid of, find out what they're missing, and find out what they need. And we can help them rise together.
It's so interesting. Be a friend to a child is sometimes perceived incorrectly. You are supposed to get to know these individuals, all individuals that you work with. As an SLP, any child that I have ever worked with, the first thing you have to establish is rapport, right? And in this case, you really want to get to know, like you said, what makes them tick, what makes them excited, what makes them passionate, what makes them feel alive, because that's the only way that they're going to be social. We can't force social. We can't necessarily force them to engage. And I know, like you did, I don't know how you were not exhausted by inviting everybody on, on all these trips around to all these theme parks and everything, Rebecca. I don't know, but like you said, you don't sleep, so it's okay. You're never tired. But yeah, I mean, I guess you can't really force it, right? Because anytime you've tried to pair these individuals together and you want to, you can't prescribe it. You can't have scripts here. Okay, talk to this one now. That's not going to work.
Mhm.
And so it's interesting because you said that be a friend, and some people read that as like the old school way of wait, like they must have their goal is will speak to a peer, right? Not speak to an adult. Because an adult they're comfortable with already, so we don't want them to get too comfortable because then they're not going to talk to a peer.
Mhm.
And so what would you respond to that?
My response is that it's all ableist. It's all based on what you're expecting the friendship and the socialization to look like. Socialization for an autistic kid could be just something like going onto a online community about the Muppets. That might be their grade A 100% social interaction. And that's okay. I mean, you cannot expect, this is the problem that I have with social skills training and
Mm.
things like that. You might be able to teach an autistic child when they see someone say, hello, my name is Joe, whatever. You are just teaching them how to mask and how to recite things because autistic children generally don't understand social concepts. It's the same reason that a lot of autistic children are LGBTQIA plus because gender is a social construct. They don't get it.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you mentioned the online communities because a lot of people will say, well, that's not being social. Yes, it is. Every time we send a text message, we're being social. Sometimes neurotypical people aren't interested in going on the phone, or picking up a call. Many say they don't want to go on the phone, they don't like phone calls, and instead they resort to texting. Or in some cases, I have a friend that sends so many voice notes, but that's sometimes they're like 20 minutes long. And I'm just like, oh, but that's her way of communicating socially because she prefers voice notes. It's just easier. And so, we're flexible to everybody's communication style. But the moment someone is having a social communication challenge, I think we want them to have their mask off all the time. And sometimes, like Dr. Stephen Shore, who was on this podcast, who was a big advocate as well, has said, he views it as a mask meter. He himself is autistic, and like we cannot expect someone to be on all the time in general. So we can't expect the same of other individuals. But even you mentioned parallel play, like when I was working in a middle school, in two different middle schools for many years, even just sharing space is being social. Being able to sit next to somebody and share space. And for some people, that's a launching pad for something even deeper and greater, but it may not happen in this moment. And I don't know if you've seen that, Jackson's only 9, so we can't fast forward Jackson's future yet, but I can forecast that it's going to be a beautiful one. I feel like so many parents view the friendship piece as hanging out, having a sleepover. I mean, not necessarily texting only because they envision the child to have a friend of what a friendship maybe would look like in terms of hanging out at each other's homes or something like that.
Mhm.
And so for Jackson and for everybody else who's listening, like, what would you say about how the expectation can be modified in terms of why sharing space might be good enough?
Sharing space is a big thing for my son. He has to invite you into his area. When he wants you to play with him or spend time with him, he doesn't want you to touch any of his stuff. He doesn't really want you to be involved. All he wants you to do is he'll show you a picture and he wants you to draw it exactly to his specifications. And that's how he plays. That's his idea of playing. He doesn't, he's not going to sit down and say, oh, mommy, guess what? Even if he could verbally communicate, he's not going to sit down and tell me about his day. It's just not how he's not going to sit down and play cards or a board game. It's not how he thinks. It's not who he is. And at some point, you have to stop grieving over the child you don't have because you think you deserve that and love the child you do have because the child you have is the child you deserve. They're all beautiful. They're all different. They're all weird. Lean into it. It's fine. Stop trying to make them allistic.
Yeah, and I mean, for you to go through this journey and to reach this other side with such full acceptance and love of Jackson, I mean, the things that you do for him, I'm just thinking about all the theme parks you went to, and I mean, that it sounds really fun, but just everything that you've tried to do to help him, and then really coming full circle and realizing, wait a second, I'm still supporting him by not doing those things. Actually, those things may not even be helpful for him. Maybe I'm taking it too far, because let him be who he really is. And now Jackson's allowed to be who he is. And it sounds like he's really happy. I mean, based on what you're saying, to be part of your family. He feels lucky probably that he's with you guys. But yeah, and the reason why I mentioned that whole thing about the friendship is because friendship looks different for different people in general. I mean, anybody I've ever seen, I sometimes question in my own black and white thinking sometimes, how's that a friendship? What is that? A business transaction, right? Well, yeah. So everybody has like a different perception of friendship in general. And the teen and tween years are hard because people want like this companionship, and Jackson will get there too. But I think it happens at different times. And I actually had someone here also on the podcast, who I actually was his speech pathologist in middle school, and now he's in Olin College of Engineering. Shout out to Spencer. But basically, he's come a long way. But in middle school, he explained to me that I remember everybody trying to like get on his case with like being more social, and it just wasn't on his map. He wasn't ready yet for it. So when I say ready, he wasn't ready for the traditional type of friendship of hanging out with someone outside of school. He just wasn't. It wasn't on his radar. It was just like he explained on the podcast that he was literally just viewing these people as people who he goes to school with. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. And maybe he would use Discord every so often or whatever, one of those. But ultimately, he said that it was in high school that it suddenly went onto his radar. And suddenly, before he knew it, he was interacting with people. One friend had another friend, and then they were hanging out. And again, not every day, obviously, because we don't hang out with people necessarily every day. But at least it was like a bond, a community that he formed, that he said that's when he found his tribe. But it was, I don't know if we can really, based on everything I learned before this podcast, but then I learned a ton more through this podcast. I don't really know if it's something that we can fast forward to. Like it seems like it's something that has to happen on its own.
Well, I would argue that, the other day I saw a flyer for a social skills group. It was a 12-week group, 12-week sessions. And for $2,000, that they would teach your children social skills. And they have these groups everywhere.
They do.
There is no group that charges $2,000 to teach your child how to interact with an autistic child. Therein lies the problem. Because an autistic child, it is not up to them to go 100% to meet you. It is up to you to come 50% to them. So we need to teach people how to interact with autistic children. We need to let them know, hey, they might not make eye contact, but they're still listening.
Oh, my pet peeve.
They might not shake your hand, but they'll remember your birthday, and we really have to teach children how to be friends to autistic people, because we're spending so much energy on teaching autistic children how to be allistic and how to deny their brain and be ashamed of their neurotype. No, that is not the way forward.
Yeah, that's like, so yeah, you touch upon how neuroaffirming is so important. And I didn't realize how important it truly was until I spent so many years in that specialized program and noticed how, you can't teach tolerance either, unfortunately. You can try, you can give models, but you can't teach it. It also has to kind of show up in a similar way, where acceptance of others in their differences, but also modeling and showing how, wait, like you can't teach it directly. It's something that I feel like you have to kind of also show how you're accepting other people, right? How you're accepting of different cultures and things. But what I have noticed, which I don't know if you've noticed too, is more and more I've noticed people actually very more curious than they used to be. Socially curious, not just the neurodivergent individuals being socially curious and having the social outlet, but then the other individuals, even myself, I mean, just very curious about how the brain works for these neurodivergent individuals. So I found neurotypical individuals, even in the teen and tween years, being very much more curious than they used to be, at least, about how it works. I don't know if that's your experience too, but so I've seen a lot of more friendships or socialization occurring between neurotypical and neurodivergent individuals. I don't know if you see that.
I saw a statistic the other day that 15 to 20% of youth identify as neurodivergent. So it's definitely a huge chunk of the population. And I think that our young people in general are more accepting and open to differences, especially to intersectional differences. So they're more aware of, hey, someone might be neurodivergent and physically handicapped. Or, I live in Charlotte and ICE is here. So we've been working to try to support the autistic immigrant population. because there are autistic people everywhere. There are brown autistic people. There are autistic people that don't speak English,
Mhm.
And when you're autistic and your child is autistic, when you watch the news, you look at everything through the lens of autism. And you start to realize how horrific things like being unhoused, when we do our unhoused initiatives. One lady in particular, the last time we went out, she was visibly stimming. I mean, she was autistic. There was no way around it. She doesn't have supports. She doesn't even have a place to live. So I think the young people really understand how many different shades of gray there are.
That really is a nice way to like move to the end of the podcast, this glimmer of hope that the younger people are more understanding. And maybe Jackson will have the opportunity. I believe he will have the I'm optimistic that Jackson will have the opportunity to grow up in a world where people are more accepting than they used to be. But not only accepting, embracing. I mean, again, this is a celebration podcast. This episode is really celebrating how the brain works in such mysterious, curious ways. And I really feel like he will be growing up in a way where people are more socially curious than ever before. As young minds, I think these days, it's just times are changing. And I don't think anybody can really change the fact that people are changing, even if they feel like they can. That's just my opinion. You have done so much for the community at large, and I just want everybody to be able to find you and and also find all the things that you're doing with all these advocacy things. So where can everybody find what you're doing and what your upcoming projects are?
You can find us on our website at autismkidsnc.org. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook. We're autismkidsnc. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Rebecca Tarrant, JD.
Wow, Rebecca, the time went so fast, but let me tell you, this was such a great conversation. And thank you for being so open and honest about everything that you've experienced as a parent, as an individual, and as a global advocate.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Thanks for joining us on Unmasking Social, where we neurodiverse advocates and those who support them explore how real friendship begins when we start showing up as ourselves. If today's episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend, leave a review, or follow me for more conversations that provide information on neurodivergent ways of thinking, communicating, and connecting. Until next time, keep staying social.